By the late 1950s, most of Eastern Europe and parts of Asia had been swept under the rug of the Iron Curtain. Countries such as Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, and even Yugoslavia had adopted a Soviet-style government, or a socialist government in general. Occasionally, people took the opportunity to rise up and attempt to overthrow their socialist oppressors. Most of these attempts failed, but they certainly had an impact within Europe. And what better example to use than the Hungarian Revolution of 1956? Well, how did it begin? To understand why the revolution began, we've got to understand that Hungary was a part of the Axis powers during the Second World War, and once defeated, Hungary was forced to change government, and civilians paid a heavy price for siding with the Nazis. Now, after a few years, the Hungarian people were getting more and more tired of the Soviet-imposed policies on their government and people. It actually began as a simple yet massive student protest in the streets of Budapest on the 23rd of October 1956, which attracted thousands as they marched through the central areas of Budapest to the Hungarian Parliament building, calling out on the streets using a van with loudspeakers. A small student delegation attempting to enter the radio building to try and broadcast the students' demands was detained. When the crowd demanded the delegation released, they were fired upon within this building by a state security police, or the AVH. Now, as a result of these students' deaths, news spread fast around the city, which appalled the citizens and caused an uproar which began the next phase of the revolution. On the afternoon of the 23rd of October, approximately 20,000 protesters conveyed next to the statue of Józef Bem, a national hero of Poland and Hungary. Peter Verez, president of the Writers' Union, read a manifesto to the crowd. Its claims were Hungary's independence from all foreign powers, a political system based on democratic socialism which meant land reform and public ownership in the economy. Hungary was to join the United Nations, and all free rights for Hungarian citizens. After reading out the proclamation, the crowd began to chant a censored patriotic poem, the national song with refrain, "We swear, this we swear, we will no longer be slaves." Someone in the crowd then cut out the communist coat of arms from the Hungarian flag, leaving the distinctive hole in the middle of it, and others quickly followed suit. Afterwards, most of the crowd crossed the river Danube to join demonstrators outside the Parliament building. At 6 o'clock, the multitude had swollen to more than 200,000 people. The whole demonstration was spirited but peaceful. At 8 o'clock, the first secretary of the ruling party, Erno Gero, broadcast a speech condemning the writers' and students' demands. Angered by Gero's hardline rejection, some demonstrators decided to carry out one of their demands: the removal of Stalin's 30-foot-high bronze statue, which was erected in 1951 on the site of a former church, which was demolished to make room for it. The headquarters of the Hungarian radio were broken into to broadcast more of the students' propaganda and demands. Tear gas and gunfire was then rained down upon the crowds by the Hungarian state security. Multiple communist symbols and architecture were defaced and destroyed by the rioters. During the night of the 23rd of October, the Hungarian Working People's Party secretary, Erno Gero, requested a Soviet military intervention to suppress a demonstration that reached an ever greater and unprecedented scale. The Soviet leadership had formulated contingency plans for intervention in Hungary several months before. By 2 a.m. on the 24th of October, acting in accordance with the orders of Georgy Zhukov, the Soviet defense minister, Soviet tanks entered Budapest. By noon on the 24th of October, Soviet tanks were stationed outside the parliament, and Soviet soldiers guarded key bridges and crossroads. Armed revolutionaries quickly set up barricades to defend Budapest, and were reported to have already captured some Soviet tanks by mid-morning. Later that day, Imre Nagy replaced Andras Hegedüs as Prime Minister. On the radio, Nagy called for an end to violence and promised to start political reforms that had been shelved 2 years earlier. The population continued to arm itself in sporadic violence. On the 25th of October, a mass of protesters gathered in front of the Parliament building. AVH units began shooting into the crowd from rooftops of neighbouring buildings. Some Soviet soldiers returned fire on the AVH, mistakenly believing that they were the targets of the shooting. By the 26th, the army was beginning to disintegrate over the constant pressure of the changing government. The fight continued as Soviet and Hungarian forces attacked the armed protesters. Molotov cocktails were thrown in the narrow streets of Budapest, and bodies littered the streets. After some debate, the Presidium on the 30th of October decided not to remove the new Hungarian government. Even Marshal Georgy Zhukov said we should withdraw troops from Budapest, and if necessary, withdraw from Hungary as a whole. This is a lesson for us in the military-political sphere. They adopted the declaration of the government of the USSR for the principles of the development of the further strengthening of friendship and cooperation between the Soviet Union and other socialist states, which was issued the next day. This document proclaimed the Soviet government is prepared to enter into appropriate negotiations with the government of the Hungarian People's Republic and other members of the Warsaw Treaty on the questions of the presence of the Soviet troops on the territory of Hungary. Thus, for a brief moment, it looked like there could be a peaceful solution. On the 1st of November, in a radio address to the Hungarian people, Nagy formally declared Hungary's withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact, as well as Hungarian stance of neutrality. Because it held office only 10 days, the national government had little chance to clarify its policies in detail. However, newspaper editorials at the time stressed that Hungary should be a neutral, multi-party social democracy. Fighting ceased between the 28th of October and the 4th of November, as many Hungarians believed that Soviet military units were withdrawing from Hungary. According to post-revolution communist sources, there were approximately 213 Hungarian Worker People's Party members lynched or executed during this period. On the 4th of November 1956, Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest to quench, once and for all, the national uprising. Vicious street fighting broke out again, but the Soviets' great power ensured victory. At 5:20 a.m., Hungarian Prime Minister Imre Nagy announced the invasion of the nation in a grim 35-second broadcast declaring, "Our troops are fighting, the government is in place." Within hours, though, Nagy sought asylum at the Yugoslav embassy in Budapest. He was captured shortly thereafter and executed 2 years later. Nagy's former colleague and imminent replacement, Janos Kadar, who had flown secretly from Moscow to the city of Olmok, 60 miles southeast of the capital, preparing to take power with Moscow's backing. The Soviet action stunned many people in the West. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had pledged a retreat from the Stalinist policies and repression of the past, but the violent action in Budapest suggested otherwise. An estimated 2,500 Hungarians died, and further 200,000 more fled as refugees. Sporadic armed resistance strikes and mass arrests continued for months thereafter, causing substantial economic disruption. Inaction on the part of the United States angered and frustrated many Hungarians. The Voice of American radio broadcasts and speeches by President Dwight D. Eisenhower and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles have recently suggested that the United States supported the liberation of captive peoples in the communist nations. Yet, as Soviet tanks bore down on protesters, the United States did nothing beyond issuing public statements for sympathy for their plight. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly enjoyed making it. I'm sorry about the delays in making these videos, but they do take quite a while to make. So if you'd like to like and subscribe, leave suggestions down below for what videos you want to see next, and have a good one.